Dark clouds gathered over Bogotá, not from rain, but from whispers. Whispers of revolution, rebellion, and resistance. Imagine a young woman, barely in her 20s, walking silently through the cobbled streets of a city ruled by fear. She carries a basket of sewing supplies, but hidden beneath the fabric are secret messages, escape plans, and dreams of a free nation. Her name? Policarpa Salavarrieta. To the Spanish crown, she was a traitor. To her people, she was a symbol of defiance. To history, she would become La Pola, the fearless girl who stared down an empire and refused to kneel. But how did an orphaned seamstress become the face of Colombian resistance? What secrets did she carry in the folds of her threadbare skirts? And why did her final words echo louder than the gunshot that took her life? This is her story. Guaduas was quiet that morning. Too quiet. The mist clung to the mountains like a secret refusing to be told. Church bells echoed faintly through the sleepy town, and the wind whispered through the cobbled streets as if carrying messages only the trees could understand. But behind that silence, something stirred. Something revolutionary. In a small adobe home, nestled between rolling green hills and guarded only by silence, a child was born. Her cry pierced the stillness, sharp, defiant, alive. That cry belonged to Policarpa Salavarrieta. No one knew it then, but that baby girl would one day shake an empire. She was born into a world ruled by shadows, Spanish chains wrapped around Colombian necks. The flag that flew above the town was not their own. It belonged to a distant king, who neither knew their pain nor cared for their names. In Guaduas, obedience was survival. Silence was safety. But Pola would never be silent. By the time she could walk, she had already begun to ask questions no one dared answer. Her parents, educated but poor, taught her to read, an act considered dangerous for a girl and near criminal for a rebel in the making. And then the silence deepened. A deadly smallpox epidemic swept through Guaduas like a ghost. Within months, her parents were gone. The house that once held books and whispered dreams became hollow. Orphaned, surrounded by grief, Pola was cast into a world that demanded obedience from girls like her. But instead of breaking, she burned brighter. What happens to a girl who loses everything to a plague and yet learns to read the language of revolution? What happens when she realizes the silence of her town hides not peace, but submission? Guaduas would remember her. Colombia would honor her. Spain would fear her. And the silence that once protected her birthplace would be shattered forever by the sound of her final defiance. The city of Santa Fe de Bogotá breathed beneath the weight of empire. Its cathedrals pierced the sky like spears, and its plazas echoed with sermons of loyalty to the Spanish crown. Soldiers in red and gold marched through its streets with polished boots and cold stares. Beneath their watchful eyes, whispers of rebellion curled like smoke from a dying fire, flickering but not yet extinguished. And into this city of secrets walked a woman no one noticed. At first, she carried no weapon. She wore no armor. She was dressed in simple clothing, her hair tucked modestly beneath a scarf. To the guards, she was nothing more than a seamstress, a quiet girl in a loud world. But behind her calm eyes and measured steps was a mind sharper than any blade. Her name was Policarpa Salavarrieta. But in Bogotá's growing underground of patriots and plotters, she was known only as La Pola. She had come under a false name, moving through the city like a shadow, unseen but listening, unheard but learning. While others bowed their heads in submission, she watched. While others whispered their fears behind locked doors, she moved freely, passing messages hidden in thread spools, smuggling plans disguised as embroidery patterns, slipping through the cracks of a city on the edge. By day, she stitched fine garments for Spanish officers and their wives, ironing their uniforms, smiling politely, nodding at their prideful boasts. By night, she unraveled everything. In smoke-filled rooms behind shuttered windows, she passed names, locations, and warnings to the rebel network. Her hands, so delicate, so precise, held the fate of generals, the hope of patriots, and the keys to prison cells. But in the shadows, danger crept ever closer. Each day the Spanish became more suspicious. Each night another rebel vanished. The city pulsed with fear. And still, La Pola moved undeterred, a flame flickering in a room full of powder. What drives someone to risk everything, freedom, love, life itself, for a country still shackled? What secrets passed through her hands before the enemy finally closed in? Because in this city of masks and daggers, even the strongest spirits can be betrayed by a whisper. And La Pola's time in the shadows was running out. They thought she was only a seamstress. But behind every stitch, every smile, every lowered gaze, a revolution was burning. The heart of Bogotá throbbed with unrest. Taverns pulsed with secrets. Behind heavy curtains and locked doors, rebels whispered of a Colombia unchained. The Spanish crown tightened its grip with every passing week, fearing the rising storm. But the storm had already begun, and its fiercest spark wore a needle on her belt instead of a sword. Policarpa Salavarrieta, La Pola, had become a ghost in plain sight. With each passing day, she slipped deeper into the rebel underworld. She memorized patrol routes, decoded enemy strategies, and carried contraband messages beneath her skirts. She wasn't just helping the cause, she was becoming its beating heart. But revolution is never solitary. Among her comrades was Alejo Sabarain, a passionate young man with fire in his eyes and ink-stained fingers from writing secret manifestos. Together, they moved through the city like twin shadows, partners in purpose, perhaps something more. Their hands rarely touched, but every glance between them crackled with tension. Not just love, but the ever-present risk of loss. Each meeting was a gamble. Each message could be their last. Still, Pola pushed forward, a flame refusing to be extinguished. She helped prisoners escape their cells, sewed false papers into jacket linings, and plotted roads through alleys no soldier dared follow. She kept lists of traitors, spies, collaborators, and delivered them into rebel hands. Even the most hardened men of the resistance began to fear what would happen if La Pola was ever caught. Because in her silence was strategy, in her fury, precision, and in her every move there was the weight of a nation struggling to be born. But Bogotá was a city of shifting shadows, and in the distance, the noose was tightening. How many secrets can one woman carry before the walls close in? How long can fire dance in the darkness before someone strikes the match that turns it into a blaze? The answer would come, soon. And when it did, history would never be the same. Every resistance has its Judas. The streets of Bogotá no longer whispered. They screamed. Spanish patrols doubled. Houses were raided at midnight. Prison cells overflowed with those accused of treason. La Pola's flame burned bright, but it had drawn the eyes of something darker, colder, merciless. In the heart of the rebel network, a single thread snapped. A courier, young, frightened, barely old enough to shave, was captured at the city gates. He carried no weapons, only a scrap of parchment tucked into the seam of his cloak. A list, names, plans, death sentences, written in invisible ink. They ordeal him for hours. The screams echoed through the prison walls like the toll of a church bell announcing doom. And eventually, as fire met flesh and iron kissed bone, he broke. He gave them everything. The names, the locations. La Pola. They came for her at dawn. Iron-shod boots pounded the ground like war drums as soldiers flooded the safe house. The rebels inside scrambled. Papers thrown into the fire, maps torn apart, codes swallowed whole. But it was too late. They seized them all. Among the captives, Alejo Sabarain, and at the center of it all, Pola, standing tall in defiance, her wrists bound but her chin lifted high. The city watched as she was dragged through the streets, the Spanish making a spectacle of their prize, but what they intended as humiliation became a moment of quiet rebellion. Children stared, women wept, men clenched their fists, and somewhere in the crowd someone whispered, "She knew this would happen," and still, she never stopped. They tried to break her in prison. No shackles could silence her. No interrogator could outwit her. When the Spanish officers demanded names, she laughed. When they threatened to kill her, she smiled. And when they asked why she had dared defy the greatest empire in the world, she whispered, "Because I belong to a country that is not yours." But even heroes bleed. Even legends feel fear in the quiet moments before fate strikes. And as she waited in her cell, the question hung heavy in the air. Who betrayed her? Was it cowardice, greed, or a calculated move by someone she trusted? The truth was buried in shadows, but the betrayal was real, and its price was only just beginning to be paid. November the 14th, 1817. The sun rose slowly over Santa Fe de Bogotá, casting long shadows across the Plaza Mayor. A chilling wind swept through the square, carrying with it an unnatural stillness, the kind that descends before something irreversible happens. Crowds gathered, murmuring, eyes wide with dread. They had come not to witness justice, but to witness a warning. At the center of it all stood a crude wooden scaffold, and climbing it, step by step, spine unbroken, was Policarpa Salavarrieta. She did not flinch. She did not beg. She met death like she met tyranny, head on, unblinking. Her hands were bound, her body weakened from days of imprisonment. And yet, as she reached the platform, her voice rose, not in fear, but in fire. She turned to the watching crowd, her gaze sweeping over the soldiers, the officers, the people. And she spoke, "I die for the freedom of my homeland. Do not weep for me. Fight for yourselves." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Mothers covered their children's ears. Guards shifted uneasily. Even the executioner hesitated, because in that moment she became more than a girl. She became a voice they could not silence, a spirit they could not hang. Her final words weren't just defiant. They were dangerous. They ignited something in the air, an invisible spark the Spanish would never be able to put out. They offered her a blindfold. She refused, and as the rifles were raised, she looked them in the eyes. 7 shots, 1 body, 1,000 souls awakened. Her blood soaked the ground where she fell. But from that red stain, a legend took root, one that would grow through generations, etched into songs, poems, and battle cries. They executed La Pola, yes, but they could not kill what she stood for. And what rose in her place was a revolution that would never forget her name. They buried her body, but not her voice. Policarpa Salavarrieta, La Pola, was silenced by bullets, but her words echoed louder than any musket fire. The Spanish believed they had crushed the rebellion by ending her life. What they didn't know was that in killing her, they had immortalized her. The plaza where she fell became sacred ground. The whispers of the people became chants, and her name, spoken in secret by trembling lips, became a weapon sharper than any blade. Her story spread like wildfire across Colombia's mountains and valleys, not as tragedy, but as prophecy. She was no longer just the orphan from Guaduas or the seamstress of Santa Fe. She became a symbol of courage, of defiance, of the unbreakable spirit of a people who refused to be ruled. Children grew up hearing tales of the girl who looked death in the eyes and did not blink. Freedom fighters marched into battle with her name on their tongues. Mothers whispered her final words to their sons before sending them to war. "Do not cry for me. Cry for the chains that still bind you." And when independence finally came, years later, blood-soaked and hard-earned, her ghost walked with them into liberty. Statues rose in her honor. Books carried her legacy. Streets bore her name. But even stone and ink cannot capture her fully, because La Pola does not live in monuments. She lives in every voice that dares to speak against oppression, in every woman who chooses fire over fear, in every moment a people remember their right to be free. And still, questions linger in the silence. What if she had lived? What if the betrayal never came? What revolutions might she have led? What dreams might she have carved into the bones of a newborn nation? We will never know. But this much is certain. They tried to bury her, but they didn't know. She was a seed. In a time when silence meant survival, one woman chose to speak. In a world ruled by fear, she chose defiance. They called her a traitor. History calls her a hero. Policarpa Salavarrieta didn't just fight for freedom. She became its symbol. Her name may have been written in blood, but her legacy is etched into the soul of a nation. And now, you know her story. If this tale moved you, ignited something deep within, or made you question what true bravery looks like, subscribe to Tales Beyond Time, because the past isn't dead. It's whispering to us, begging to be remembered. Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and always listen for the echoes of the forgotten.